1, 2, 3.
And can you hear me okay? 1, 2, 3.
Welcome in to DNVR Avalanche at the Rink podcast. Meghan Angley joined by Montano. We're here with another episode, and we quite literally just came from the rink. This time, 2 different practices today.
Yeah, opposite ends of town. I was down south at Family Sports. You were up in Loveland.
Lots of updates. We'll definitely get into the updates from each of those two, but we kind of have to rapid fire through a little bit of this. I got a little nervous, but I love that we are narrowing in on trade deadline talks at this time. It's really ramping up. Big name comes off the board. I like that you wrote out Terence Echo. I think that is going to change the landscape for what happens. I mean, it points to interesting things with Patrick Kane.
Yep. Well, I was just going to say, Terence Echo is the first big chip to fall, and between that and then some of the other injuries that we're going to get into, like when we talked about it a week ago, it was what was it, 2 weeks ago? I don't know anymore. I don't know what day it is. We really talked about it in kind of like broader strokes of like keep an eye on all these guys. To your point, Meghan, it's fun right now because like the picture is becoming a little bit clearer for who might fit here. Okay, so the Rangers are off the board here and all that stuff. So yeah, let's rapid fire through some of these.
Well, we won't rapid fire through the Ryan O'Reilly conversation. We'll actually treat this one with a little bit of care because it is interesting. I feel like we'll repeat ourselves on a couple of things because we did get to talk about Ryan O'Reilly a little bit on the hockey show. I thought that was a great introduction to this topic because we can envision what Ryan O'Reilly's fit would look like in Colorado because of his time in Colorado. It makes it pretty easy to do. And I was getting really deep into it. You look at the lockout year, I think, set a precedent with the NHLPA and players and the importance of securing their futures. Like, I look at it from the fan perspective at that time.
04-05 or 12-13?
12-13.
12-13, okay.
More recently. Because
isn't that sad that we have to... Which lockout are you talking about?
Which lockout? But this, I think, belongs in the O'Reilly conversation because this is when we saw a player also advocate for himself. We talk about him being a tough negotiator. And I just want to hear your thoughts, too, on the lockout at that time, because I was a young hockey fan at that point, and it introduced me to the concept of the livelihood of players. Like the depth players that I care about so much in present day are protected by a collective bargaining agreement that is favorable, and that is only made possible with the NHLPA going to bat for the rights of players. And you look at some of the big dollar money that a lot of the top stars in the league make, and it can be easy to become disenchanted by the league when lockouts happen. But I do feel like this was a really formative time in understanding the role that the players play in this.
So, the 04-05 lockout brings up upon the salary cap, right? And that was a way, obviously that wasn't all of what that lockout was about, but like that was a way of kind of saying, hey, we're not going to have the New York Yankees of the NHL, right? Where it's Colorado, Detroit, New Jersey every year because their owners are willing to spend the most. So an important development league-wide coming out of 04-05. And then you're right. It wasn't until after 12-13, and again, Ryan O'Reilly was one of the first people to kind of try to go against this trend of players not taking bridge deals, right? Or not as often, because that was the standard. It was you got drafted, you had your ELC, then you took a 2 to 3 year bridge deal at way lesser money. And then after that, it almost, in my opinion, again, obviously isn't the actual case, but it almost kind of felt like that's when you're allowed to start negotiating as a young player. After you've done your ELC, you've done a bridge deal, now we can treat you as an adult. And it just always felt odd because, you had guys like Matt Duchene, high draft picks, really high pedigree, who, took what seemed like small money deals. They were still in RFA, and they just really didn't have a ton of rights. And like you said, when you're dealing with a lockout, it's really easy to look at the high end of what players are making and saying, what are they complaining about? Oh my gosh. But there really was an issue, and still more to the extent than I think a lot of people realize. I'm not trying to get anyone to feel bad for pro athletes, but like you have a limited window where where your body will hold up long enough and well enough for you to make money playing, professional sports, right? So it's a limited window. So not only are you having to think about, well, here's what I'm going to do with this money now, but it's how does this money set me up in my future? How does this money set me up later? Am I doing enough so that I don't have to work after hockey? People don't take into account when you make that much, you pay a lot in taxes. You pay, the players pay escrow. You pay agent fees. On the smaller end of the contracts, and the NHL is already easily by a lot the lowest paid sport of the major 4 professional sports in North America. Those checks are a lot smaller than people think. So like you said, it's hard when you're in the moment and watching a lockout because all you want to do is see the sport, and it's easy to sit there and say, oh, these are millionaires arguing with billionaires. But it is important. Like, there are larger issues there that these players in the bottom half of the league need to make sure they're taken care of. And it has ramifications on the stars as well. It's hard to see the necessity that comes out of some of those lockouts, and a lot of the hangups, like politics, it's other people trying to shoehorn different things into, well, we'll give you guys this, but we get this. And, that's where you end up with these stalemates. But it should tell you something that the NHLPA said, we're willing to lock out the season for X number of time to get this because we feel it's, again, like you're talking about, the security for these kind of lower end players, the minimum salary came up. The NHLPA said, we feel it's important to make sure that our players are taken care of and that anybody coming into the league, whether it's a superstar or a call-up, that you're being financially compensated in an appropriate way.
And Ryan O'Reilly is one that fits the conversation a bit differently because he was a young star on the rise, that it maybe wasn't that was the concern with him, but he held out coming out of the lockout until February, and he went through the ordeal of the offer sheet with the Flames. I think it's interesting that the Avs at the end of this month are also going to be taking on the Flames. Do you think that Colorado Avalanche, Ryan O'Reilly could return to the Colorado Avalanche by the end of this month and sort of come full circle?
If it's by the end of this month, I'm not sure, but look, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Meghan, how this was something that we had kind of pegged as, wow, wouldn't that be a great fit? And wouldn't that be a really fun full circle moment and story? And again, I've joked now for the last couple of seasons of, gosh, you know what the Avs could use? Ryan O'Reilly in that second line center role. Like, really, I mean, he has been for the last number of years been exactly what the Colorado Avalanche have been looking for in that second line center role. Now, you got obviously an unbelievable year from Nazem Kadri, and it carries you all the way to the Stanley Cup championship. So, it all worked out for everybody. But now that you don't have Kadri, and there still is some of that uncertainty at 2C, look, if the Avs are going to take a step back and say, we aren't messing around, we see a deficiency at 2C, and we want to take care of it. We want to take care of it, no questions asked. We want the best guy that's available for this role. It's Ryan O'Reilly. The Avs really didn't do that last year. They didn't take the big swing. They held on to their 2023 first-round pick because they said, again, internally, we want it for this season because they felt like the moves they made with the depth they had down the middle, all they needed was some fringe tweaks, and Arturi Lehkonen and Josh Manson ended up becoming well beyond fringe players. But they have kind of alluded to this since last year's trade deadline that if we need to take a big swing at next year's deadline, we want to make sure that we've got assets that we can do that. Tarasenko coming off the board, I think we'll get into the Jonathan Taves conversation, but with the uncertainty there with both him and Patrick Kane, you're just kind of looking around and like it's almost kind of like narrowing down your field a bit, and Ryan O'Reilly continues to stay right in those crosshairs. Like I said, I don't know if they can do it before the end of the month. It'd be really fun if he came back right before the Calgary game.
I think it should happen the day of. Zadorov, Comfort, and O'Reilly in the same building.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
It would be so good for the plot.
Yeah, and then Kadri, the man he's now replacing.
I love it even more. NHL, look, it's for the plot.
Right. I'm leaving out of town tomorrow night, and I was making a joke to my buddy. I was like, I normally wouldn't bring my laptop for something like this. I was like, but I'm just sure that I'm inviting. Now, both AJ and I will be out of the state. Keep your eye out for a blockbuster deal in the next 72 hours from the Avs, because why wouldn't it go that way?
And I do want to reflect on his time here and sort of group it into the conversation about his fit here.
Yeah.
But the memory of Ryan O'Reilly, I don't think should be completely tarnished on the way that he exited. I do think he is also really matured as a player. But the fit here feels so obvious, it's almost not worth talking about. But you described a very shut down defensive line that could be projected if a Nichushkin, Landeskog, O'Reilly line existed.
Find me a line in the NHL that you'd say, I'll take that. I think that line can win the matchup battle against Nichushkin, Ryan O'Reilly, and Gabe Landeskog. No way.
And I think that's his strength as a player, is being so good defensively. You have someone who is routinely in the Selke conversation.
Yeah.
32 years old. What is the cost for a player like that realistically? Now, I guess the other part of it is he missed some time with a foot injury. Does that factor into it to the benefit of anyone else at all? 14 games. He's recently returned, though, so you have to assume that he's fully healthy.
Yeah. I mean, if we've got about what, Meghan, 3 weeks-ish, give or take a day or two until the trade deadline. Look, if Ryan O'Reilly just goes off and, really gets back into swing, then no. But if he stumbles at all out of the gate, I think every team that's acquiring will be doing themselves a disservice and not say, he missed how many weeks with a foot injury and now he doesn't quite look himself. I don't know. How about a third instead of a second? As like the additional picks or whatever. I think the cost with Ryan O'Reilly starts at a first. It's probably a first and a prospect. And then from there, I do think it depends how he looks coming out of this injury. If he looks not himself, I could see it being a first and a prospect. We're not going to give you anything else. Now, if St. Louis is retaining money, does that change things? Does that maybe kind of wash, any question marks you could potentially have about his health? I think if you're a team looking to acquire Ryan O'Reilly, you're doing yourself a disservice by not trying to leverage that he's coming off a semi-long-term injury to his foot. He's already not the most mobile skater. That's maybe his one thing that doesn't fit just picture perfect with this Avalanche group is he's not a great skater. He doesn't play with a ton of speed, but he's so smart. He's kind of like, he strikes me as someone that could, if he was injured like in the playoffs, could have like the Leon Draisaitl effect that we saw last year where like almost just play the game standing still and be incredibly effective. So, if you can point to, we're worried about his mobility with his foot to save you a draft pick or a little bit of capital, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not bringing that up.
And we talk about his strengths defensively, but he is still
very good offensive player.
I think he has one of the highest shooting percentages of his career outside of the 2013-14 season in Colorado, which was a career best. And at 32, and only recently 32 too, he continues to be an offensive weapon as well as a strong defensive player that it feels hard to imagine that he could be possible here because of the position that he's in with St. Louis. He's going to go to the highest bidder. Yeah. And I have to imagine that a lot of teams see this ready-made top six player that can penalty kill, throw him on the power play. He's a bona fide top line NHL player right now. Captain. I don't know how the Avs could make an offer that wouldn't be beat out by another team.
See, and I think this is where, when you asked earlier about like, would the Avs, want to, do this at the end of before the end of the month, this is the one area where, look, if Ryan O'Reilly is their guy, if this is who they're saying he's number one on our list, I think the way that you combat that, Meghan, is go to St. Louis now. Hey, and you may want to cover your ears for this.
It's foodie, isn't it?
No. Hey, first and, Sean Barons.
Oh.
And mostly just to see like, hey, here's like our best offer. Are you going to, gawk at that? Because if they say, well, no, we're willing to wait. Well, then to me, you wait to see, but now Sean Barons isn't available. If you think this is our guy and we're afraid about getting outbid, go make your offer right now and go see if you can pull him out ahead of the trade deadline. I've heard some speculation that people don't think it would even take a first-round pick. So a first and Sean Barons may be like a way overpay for Ryan O'Reilly. I'm more of just making like the point of like, if that's what you're worried about, go make your best offer right now and say, why wait for the bids to roll in? Here's something you're happy with. Here's a foodie, a guy that we think could be possibly NHL ready, a first, and then for you to eat a little bit of money, we'll throw in a third for 2025. You know what I mean? Like, go make what you think is a strong offer now and say, we'll help you set the market. We're going to get you your first round pick. We're going to get you your prospect. We'll throw in a little bit extra for you to eat some money. Why are we waiting? What are you waiting for? You're waiting. You're going to wait to hope you get a better offer and, kind of put the ball in their court. Because it is a realistic opportunity. There is something real that we just saw with, like what happened with Chicago. That really the Tarasenko move really changed the landscape for Kane. And now there's question marks about, well, maybe the Rangers were questioning Patrick Kane's health.
Right.
And now what does that do to the rest of the market? Say, New York Rangers knew that they were at the top of his list, and they just chose to go make their move elsewhere. Well, maybe we're not interested in Patrick Kane anymore. Maybe the price for Patrick Kane just went down. That's what I would do if I'm the Avs, because you're right. Like, it's probably going to be relatively easy for them to get outbid for a guy like O'Reilly. So I would simply go to them and say, hey, look, we're not messing around with any of that. Here's our offer. We want him in our lineup as soon as possible.
And this isn't exclusive to just what would be needed to acquire Ryan O'Reilly. This could be even true of Chicago if they were targeting someone like Taves. But other teams have picks. Is there an asset in Colorado that, one, you think would be movable? Like, have we entered Girard conversation here? And would that be the way that the Avs separate or differentiate from other teams and what they're able to offer by having a ready-made NHL player involved in that?
I'll say this right now, Megan. I would be floored, absolutely flabbergasted, blown away if the Avs subtracted at this deadline. I know that's a conversation that's out there. I know people have this weird issue with Sam Girard, who, again, just purely statistically and just the level of player he is, he's a set-and-forget top four defenseman on 32 NHL teams. He just is. I don't know, for whatever reason, people have issues with his play, whatever. Everyone wants to, how can we move him? The Avs are down tomorrow. The Avs will be without Josh Manson, Cale Makar, Eric Johnson.
They're not moving Sean Barnes. They can't. Sorry.
They can't move Sam Girard.
No, either.
They can't move Sam Girard. Like, again, I'm with you on Correct. Sean Barons. Like,
True.
You need a high-end defensive through your pipeline, but you can literally, Megan, like right now today, if the Avs are serious about trying to repeat, which I wholeheartedly believe they are, you moving Sean Barons makes so much more sense because that dude's not in your lineup for at least 2 years. Maybe even 3, depending on how he develops the American League level. If he gets there, you know what I mean? Like, as high as we are on Sean Barons and as good as he looked at WJCs, as good as he's looked this season, he is still an unknown. He is still an unknown. And you're just, the Avs just aren't, and if they do, I will happily get on the air and say I was wrong, but I just can't see any world where Chris McFarland, Joe Sakic meet with Jared Bednar, look at the injuries they've had on their back end this year, the injury luck they've had in general, and say, we're comfortable moving on from a top 4 defenseman. Just for the hell of it. This Avs team has made their living. They won a championship on the backs of the strength of their defensive depth. And whether people like him or not, Sam Girard is a huge part of that. They lost Sam Girard last year, and you had to replace him with Jack Johnson. So for all the people that are complaining, would you rather have Jack Johnson or Sam Girard? You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think, unless it was something that was truly knock your socks off and you get a replacement level defenseman in return, I just can't see them moving on from Sam Girard in season. You get to this summer, I think that is a realistic conversation with his money. The Avs trying to make things fit. JT Confort's had a great year. I think they'd love to keep him if they can. I think the Girard conversation is a conversation for this summer, but not in season. Now, to answer your question of how they differentiate, it's the first round pick. It's the 2023 first. A lot of other contending teams have already moved on from that. This is better than I do, Megan. This is a very deep draft. 2023 first round draft picks are worth a lot right now. There were GMs last year that were actually asking for 2023 first instead of 2022 first. They were willing to punt on a year of drafting to get to this year's draft. So they do have that. That was strategic. They don't have a second or a third for a couple of years. But I think you've got a guy like Oscar Olausson, who's a former first-round pick, still a couple years away, but has NHL-ready tools. I think you have a guy like Jean-Luc Foudy, who has had a nice NHL debut this year. He's had a really strong season in the American League. And then really, we talked about it last week, and I wrote about it last week. I think moving Sean Behrens would be their break glass in case of emergency move. I don't think they want to do that. But at the end of the day, you do kind of have that ace in the hole of he was a captain on Team USA for WJCs, really a standout defenseman for them. He's had a great year at DU. He's maybe ready to make the leap to pro hockey. Like, the Avs are asset poor, but like they have some pieces that they can move that would really empty the cupboards. But again, this is just the reality. We talked about lockouts coming out of the 04-05 lockout. This is the reality of being a contending team. It's how well can you juggle your roster and stay competitive. And we've seen teams like Pittsburgh do it. We've seen teams like Boston do it. We've seen teams like Tampa do it. It's possible. Chicago did it for damn near a decade. 3 cups in 6 years. Again, for all the pockmarks that are now on that first one, like the way that they were able to keep that core together and continue to churn out guys that fit well in the system, this is unfortunately how you have to do it. You've got to tear it down, build from the ground up, see how long you can keep it there, and then you got to tear down and start over again. The Avs are now officially in the let's see how long we can keep it here phase. And again, you look at a guy like Sean Behrens, as tough as it was to move on from Justin Barron last year, the Avs looked at him and said, we think that Artturi Lehkonen can help us win a cup right now in the next 2 months. Justin Behrens is 3 or 4 years out from being a real impact player for us. We're going for it. And I think if push comes to shove, as much as they don't want to do that, that may end up being the conversation around Sean Behrens. Sorry, Justin Barron, Sean Behrens.
Yeah.
So as asset depleted as they are, I think we maybe oversell that a little bit. The Avs absolutely have pieces that teams would be interested in, very interested in. The issue is the lack of second and third round picks for multiple years, and the fact that if you decide to move any of those guys that we just listed, Olausson, Foudy, Behrens, woo! Now it's empty. Now next year you're looking at the trade deadline, approaching the trade deadline, going, what is there?
You'd say the cupboard is barren. But honestly, I don't think Girard gets moved. I don't think Behrens gets moved.
I agree with you.
I think Behrens could be moved, but I don't think he should. And I think that people who are a lot smarter than me also would recognize this.
I agree.
But as you were speaking, a nightmare scenario unfolded in my mind that he is an Illinois native. And they could be very keen to bring him back to Chicago in some sort of Chicago orchestrated deal. Mm-hmm. And I could see them throwing in a Jack Johnson type with a defensive prospect coming back the other way. And other things would have to be grouped in to make something like that possible. But a nightmare scenario just unfolded.
That to me would almost have to be Jonathan Taves and Jack Johnson for Sean Behrens. Like, you don't get any picks. You know what I mean? And at that point, why wouldn't Chicago just want the first round pick? But like, I agree with you. I really do. I think that's maybe we'll even have Yaya May grab it. I think Sean Behrens being moved really is like break glass in case of emergency. Your trade options have dried up. The only thing left is the big swing for Ryan O'Reilly, and there's a bid on the table that you have to beat. I'm fully with you though, Megan. I think you're 100% right. He's another one that if they moved on from Sean Behrens, I would be not as surprised as if they traded Sam Girard, but I'd be pretty surprised.
I'm kind of leaving most of the defensive group and prospects out of the conversation because it just feels like it would be so unwise. But is there anyone in the Avs forward group, prospect or presently, that you could see being a dark horse trade piece? I don't even think Alex Noak. I'm thinking someone like a Ben Myers.
Yeah, he's mine.
Okay.
He's mine. Yep, because I think the Avs do have a long-term plan for Ben Myers, but he is my dark horse for that may be why they're able to sell another team on Ben Myers. Like, hey, we're the defending champs and we are trying to find room for him and we just can't right now. Surely you can find room for him, St. Louis, you know what I mean, or whoever. He's my kind of dark horse. Oscar Olausson and Sampo Ranta are my two that I expect to be moved this year.
One or the other, or something involving both?
Either way. Yeah.
Not really, okay.
I don't expect... If the Avs come out of the trade deadline with both of those guys in their organization, I'd be a little bit surprised. If both of them are moved, I also wouldn't be that surprised. You know what I mean?
Interesting. It's such a weird position to be in that I would be happy for Ranta because I think he would like to be getting NHL minutes or would find the path to that a lot closer in a different organization now. But in the case of Olausson, I still see NHL upside that could fit within the Avs group one day that I would be very sad to part with that right now.
I agree. And the reason I pointed those two guys is because the Avs don't have... the Avs don't have a second or third.
Right.
And you have to make that up somewhere. And really, with Olausson being a former first-round pick, it is really easy to sell that as, here's a first-round pick. Again, in talking with NHL players, they all see what you see, a potential, a young kid who has an NHL future, but it is almost, from multiple NHL players I've talked to, it is pretty much consensus. He, in particular, is at least 3 years out from being anything really impactful.
I agree with that assessment just because of the trajectory he's taken in juniors and now in his first full year pro. It's not lightning fast. It shouldn't be. That's development because it is progressing. And he's having a better season now than the few games we saw of him in the Calder Cup playoffs and at the end of last year. So I really do like him, though. So I hope he is not who gets involved in that.
I thought it was telling, last thing on Olausson, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I thought it was telling, just again, in terms of his readiness, when they were really going through the injuries, as kind of coy as they were not shy about keeping guys around if they liked the debut. See Jean-Luc Foudy. I think the fact that Olausson got one game and was immediately reassigned just kind of tells you, again, it's not bad, but he's still just very green. So I think, again, using that Justin Barron equivalency, we don't need him in 3 years. We need that impact now. To me, he is there in lieu of a second or third round pick. It's Oscar Olausson.
You know, it's funny too. We think about the difference in the forward group this year, the loss of Kadri, the loss of Burakovsky. If he was NHL ready, he would be such a wonderful addition to replace some of the production that Burakovsky was able to produce.
Again, multiple NHLers have compared him to Andre Burakovsky in terms of where they think his ceiling could be. And so, we'll see.
We're moving on. We will not discuss the prospects being moved any longer, but we will talk about the status of Cale Makar.
Yep.
We, on the hockey show, talked a little bit about how we felt about the contact from the Pittsburgh game.
The hockey show on Mile High Sports, by the way. Ryan Bolding had us both on. We love Ryan. He's the best.
So good.
Shout out, Ryan.
Shout out, Ryan.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I didn't know if we wanted to dive back into how we felt about the contact or bring it more forward-based and talk about where he's at presently, what this means for the team moving forward.
And then let's do a little bit of both.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about the hit first. Just revisit this just a little bit.
I do want to talk about it because Jeff Carter finally spoke about it.
And his response is exactly what I think you and I were both alluding to, of like, his response actually bothered me.
It bothered me too because he was defensive. Like, did you watch it?
Yeah. Like, what do you want me to do? And it's like, that's what him saying, like, what else am I supposed to do, is exactly what you and I were talking about. What do you want me to do? I just don't think the NHL should take that as an acceptable response when one of the game's premier players got hit in the head and is now missing, I call 3 games significant time. He is out for tomorrow at least. The Avs are playing back-to-back. If he's hard out for tomorrow, I can't imagine that he'll play the next day on the road. So, I mean, you're talking 4 games, maybe a 5th. Like, you now have a superstar in the league missing significant time. What, because a guy just wasn't paying it, wasn't paying attention? wasn't in control of what he was doing. Like, again, I don't think it was malicious. I don't think Jeff Carter did it on purpose. You were very clear about that when we were on the hockey show on Saturday. But I do think the NHL penalizes you if you don't see what's happening and you accidentally run into a guy and you catch him in the face with your stick and you split his lip open. That's a 4-minute penalty. Regardless if you meant to do it or not, regardless if you saw him, regardless if you were turning, he was turning, whatever, it's a 4-minute penalty because you got a guy in the face with your stick and he's bleeding. That is just the rule. Again, looking back on it, I guess I don't really have an issue with him not getting a penalty, him not being kicked out of the game, whatever, but I thought it absolutely warranted a 1-game suspension as you got to be more aware. You have to make sure, like, you are responsible for your own body. Again, I use the example of Cale Makar getting called for those couple penalties, and it's not just Cale Makar; it's happened around the league. The little pick play,
right,
on the power play when someone runs into a player that's not looking, even though you're not looking, you didn't see that guy coming. The ref says, "Hey, you're on the offensive. You are responsible for making sure you're not getting in the way and setting accidental picks." And Cale Makar now pays extra special attention when he drops that puck on the power play. The drop breakout, he is constantly now looking over his shoulder, making sure that no one's coming behind him so he doesn't take a penalty. To me, this is the same thing, just on a little bit larger scale. Jeff Carter's response really bothered me because that's him saying, I don't give a shit. Look, he got to look out where he's going. And it's like, no, the onus is on you in that situation. Cale Makar had made a play on the puck a second and a half, 2 seconds earlier. The onus is on you.
And I'll be frank that I don't expect Jeff Carter to have a different reaction from that because he'd incriminate himself if he said, I could have done more to avoid that contact.
Right.
But it also proves the problem of not having more accountability. Like, he's not taking accountability in his comment.
Yep.
You don't expect him to necessarily, but then how can you expect him or any other player to in the future be more aware of those situations if there is zero accountability expected?
Right. And for me, because I'm with you, like, I'm not expecting, I want to make sure, we're clear. I'm not expecting Jeff Carter to come out and be like, man, I wish the NHL would have suspended me, blah, blah, blah. But I would have liked for him to say, like, super unfortunate. I didn't see him turning. He didn't see me, nasty, collision. I hope he's okay. I know he's had to miss a couple games now. You never like to see that. And I would have been like, at least he's mindful of Cale Makar's situation, how unfortunate that is. I just didn't like him getting defensive about it with the, well, what do you want me to do? Because that comes back to the exact issue that I think you and I have been pretty in step in terms of pounding the table on. Like, there need to be a fine, a suspension, something that just says, be in control of your body. Be in control of where you're at and understand what's going on around you a little bit better. I didn't like that. Now, at practice today, we got several injury updates on a bunch of guys, and essentially the consensus is no timelines on anybody.
Update on Val Nichushkin, he wasn't out there.
He's just on a maintenance day. He'll play tomorrow.
Eric Johnson?
Out. No timeline. Frankie out. No timeline.
What are the
Randy out. No timeline. Helm out. No timeline.
What are the injuries for
lower body?
For both Frankie and EJ?
Yeah.
Manson was out there. Is he close? Or?
Close, yeah.
Is he an option for tomorrow?
Not likely.
Okay.
You didn't mention Cale just then. Is he, obviously he was out
there. No timeline. Didn't get that far.
Is there just like unclear of their injuries, or is it just that time of the year where there's no?
No, it's unclear. Yeah, I have no idea. There's some guys that are still getting evaluated. We know Cale's the head injury, right? So he's out until he's good. I don't know when that's going to be. Won't be tomorrow.
Is Eric a case of still getting evaluated?
Yes.
So Cale won't be tomorrow?
No.
Okay.
Cale Makar being a part of that. No real timeline for his return. When you're talking about head, it's whenever he's feeling better. He skated in a red non-contact today with the team. Jared Bednar said he is out for tomorrow, so he's not playing tomorrow against Tampa. But they're kind of taking it day by day. And Kyle Fredrickson from the Denver Gazette asked, I thought, a really interesting couple of questions. And I hope I'm not like taking anything away. So if Kyle Fredrickson puts out a piece on this, go read it so that I'm not completely stealing his quotes here. But he asked Jared about, whenever a player comes back and then misses time later with a head injury, especially after the whole Tua thing in the NFL this year, he said there is just some extra scrutiny. And he asked Jared how he felt about how it was handled.
Yeah, well, number one, Kale. You talk to Kale. He's going to, most players now, they're not going to, make something up to get back in a game. They know how serious it can be. We're all educated on it, off-season, pre-season, start of regular season. And most guys have been doing it for years now, and any new information we get regarding head injuries, they pass it down to us and what the protocols are. And Matt's also heavily involved in that. So when, I have a lot of trust in those guys. They go off, they do the doctor's report, they do whatever tests they need to do, they get their quiet time. And if the player's saying he's good and he's passing all the tests and he's good, doesn't mean that he's not going to pop up the next day like it did with Kale.
And just one follow-up on that. I know in the NFL there's like an independent doctor who deals with players. Do you guys have someone who's separate from the team to examine head injuries, or do you know that protocol?
Well, there would have been a doctor down in the room. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't. It's not just our guys going in to do the test. They spot him. The concussion spotter comes and sees the head shot, and then he tells him to go down the room, and then we wait for the rest of the information.
And essentially, Bednar said we were fine with it. We're happy with the protocols and things like that. And then, called out the fact that there is, the concussion spotter is a third-party medical professional that comes in and is part of all that testing and stuff. And Cale Makar says, I'm good to go. I feel good. And I liked that Jared talked about the awareness that players and coaches have, even if the league doesn't necessarily acknowledge it publicly yet, that there's a lot of information given teams and players and things like that, and they felt comfortable in the moment putting Cale Makar back in the game. I just thought that was a good question from Kyle, because it is easy to say, well, they shouldn't have put him back in there, but it's what makes head injuries so tricky. So yeah, it's his status is uncertain going forward, and Jeff Carter's reaction or quote on it was the part to me that I thought was the most disappointing about him not receiving any level of supplemental discipline. Is it does kind of feel like he was like, well, it was an accident, so who cares? And you and I have been making the point all week of once you set that precedent that once it wasn't on purpose, you have opened a new trap door here, and you don't know what's going to come out of it.
Right, because it's bigger than Jeff Carter. I don't have a personal issue with Jeff Carter.
I agree.
I don't think it's interchangeable. You put any player in that position, I don't expect him to respond differently. But how can we expect players to be incentivized to avoid this type of contact in the future, Jeff Carter or otherwise, if there isn't anything to counter this possible risky precedent that is being set? We talked about it too, but the difference between incidental and intentional should be a separation that is made and how player safety evaluates this
100%.
too, so that players aren't unfairly getting some sort of track record for accidental contact. It's just a matter of keeping any player, not just Cale Makar, but it's very notable because he is a star player in the league.
Right.
It feels really bad. I don't have an issue with how it was handled. It's easy to say in hindsight that you probably wouldn't have liked him to go out and take 5 more shifts after this happened, but it's fickle. I just hope that he's okay. I'm glad to hear that he is at practice skating, even if in a red non-contact jersey.
Yeah, and like you said, I just want to make sure we make this point clear because we are talking about it now a week later. Neither Meghan or I think that was intentional. Neither of us think that was a dirty play from Jeff Carter. But just kind of the result you're left with now, and a 9-10 minute a night Jeff Carter just took out one of the league's premier players and probably the league's best defenseman for at least a week and a half with a play that he, by his own admission, was just like, oh, I didn't see him. Come on, man. You're an NHL player. You need to be better.
You're tracking that puck. You also see the player who is in your peripheral also tracking that same puck.
Right.
It's hard to imagine he didn't, because you have to have on-ice awareness to be an NHL player.
Right.
You just have to have some semblance of it. I'm not fully buying it. I'm also not throwing the book at him thinking he's this horrible person for it. I
100%.
just not buying like total unawareness.
Right. Yep. So no, yeah, like I said, you and I are in step on that. I think it should have even been like, he was fined this amount for incidental contact to the head. He was suspended 1 game for incidental contact to the head. If you went through the trouble, NHL, to take the verbiage blind side out of your rule to say all encompassing all hits to the head are illegal, then do that. then follow up on that is my only thing. Yeah.
Our last segment, I didn't want to breeze by the fact that Logan O'Connor finally broke the scoring drought, but we were really pressed for time. Yeah. And I also didn't want to not give any sort of Eagles update because we did go to 2 separate practices today. The positive news is that Jean-Luc Foudy has resumed taking full practice in a regular contact jersey. He missed just 2 games with an undisclosed upper body injury, and he was doing line rushes with Charles Hudon and Ben Myers, getting power play work in. So Foudy looks like he's 100% ready to go. The only downside is Alex Galchenyuk has not resumed skating yet. He also is dealing with an upper body injury, shoulder related, and his timeline sounds really unexpected. But the reason this is a disappointing update is because Bednar talked about how Cronin speaks very highly about the improvement that Galchenyuk has been making, and I corroborated as much. He is really high on Galchenyuk. He said he's been awesome, that he's digging in, doing all the work that's been asked of him, and a lot of those defensive details that he was asked to work on, he's digging in really deep there. And it's interesting because it'll parallel in a lot of ways the Merkley conversation, that they're going to be put in a very similar position where when we first talked about Galchenyuk, the way Cronin framed it was, this is a player who looks like he hasn't been taught how to play the right way.
Yep.
And just in briefly talking with Cronin about Merkley, some of the mistakes that are getting made defensively, Cronin doesn't even feel like he's aware what he did wrong. And there's a lot of teaching that's happening. But I wanted to bring at least that update for Galchenyuk onto the table. For anyone who's been wondering, too, why the Avs haven't utilized him sooner, I think that this has always been the plan, that he would be getting to work with the Eagles in Loveland this way.
He's going to be the ones one of the ones I'm most curious to watch now here at the back half of the year. One, assuming he gets healthy, could he help this Avs team at all? And 2, I'm going to be really curious to watch his contract status, because it feels like it's been a really nice fit between just the Avalanche organization and Alex Galchenyuk. He seems to be really enjoying and embracing his time in Loveland, while I think still seeing a path to the NHL. And it sounds like, I asked Jared Bednar about him, whatever that was, a couple weeks ago, and he, said he's been checking in with Cronin. You now have gone up there and heard directly from the source. And it just sounds like there's been a nice little marriage here. So he's one that I'm going to be really curious to keep an eye on, because I do think that guy, if the Avs decide to keep him around beyond this year, whether it be in these playoffs or next year, we've talked so much about the Avs' ability to find depth in unconventional ways over the last number of seasons. That's part of why they've had the success that they've had, and they are defending Stanley Cup champions. He's going to be an issue because I think he has the potential to be a real X factor for this team in one way or another for as long as he sticks around here. If things that can continue to go the way that they have.
Another interesting update, a player who was once a Black Ace and among leading scorers last year with the team, Mikhail Maltsev, has been on the road to recovery after sustaining a very unusual injury in November. And the timeline is still out. Basically, it was something like a severed tendon he had to get repaired that was cut on his leg. And so he was immobile shortly after. He had to get surgery to repair it. He has resumed skating, but the way Cronin framed the timeline for his return was so uncertain that he doesn't even want to get his hopes up, which is honestly, Cronin did this last year with an Alex Bocage injury that he absolutely did return from. So I don't think we don't see Mikhail Maltsev ever again. I just think that we were targeting late February, but really put an asterisk by it. That is very uncertain.
He's a guy that if he wasn't dealing with the injuries is another one that I could have maybe seen as being moved this year. I know we're getting close to the end here, but I did just want to give a shout out. You mentioned Logan O'Connor. Just a big congratulations to him. We've gotten to know him a little bit this year, just in the room. He's a great guy, always willing to talk. It was awesome to see him score that goal on Saturday, and then he got engaged yesterday, right before the Super Bowl. So just a shout out to him. Always a great guy, always very generous with his time, willing to talk. We talked about him at the beginning of the year, Meghan, as someone who really had kind of like carved out, on that injury depleted group, a nice little leadership role for himself as being, an example, someone that the coaches leaned on a lot and pointed to as this is what we want to see you guys doing. Jared Bednar talked about the fact that the scoring drought isn't as problematic with a guy like Logan O'Connor because he finds so many other ways to contribute. It was great to see him get on the board and get rewarded. And then, maybe he was just waiting for the goal drought to end to pop the question, but he did, and he's on the road to getting married. So congratulations to him.
And I have to chuckle at what the perspective for his fiance might have been like. Holding out, okay, let's just score already. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. Knowing it's coming, yeah.
Right. I think it's wonderful. I'm glad you shouted it out. You should absolutely read the Sunday at the Rink piece because we talk a little bit more about the impact he's had and why he has absolutely played to and above expectation, even going through a 38-game scoring drought.
Yeah.
And he's still turned it on. He's finding ways to contribute outside of just that. We are very big Logan O'Connor fans.
Yeah, no, he's just a great dude, always great to work with. And that's something that, doing this job, you have to look at sports just a little bit different when you're around the team and stuff, and you find yourself kind of like rooting for the stories more than like, anything like that, and individuals. And he's definitely an individual to me that like I said, we've gotten to know, and just as we've got to know him a little bit, he's everything that you hope like your pro athletes would be, just in terms of the way that he is off the ice. Last thing for me, Megan, you mentioned that at the Rink, the Sundays at the Rink written piece. If you guys ever want more of what we're talking about here, we try to do a pretty good job of pulling highlights or graphics or tweets, other things that people have called out that are relevant. So always go over and check that out. There's everything that we talk about on this show plus more. So always make sure you're catching the written piece as well. Comes out Sundays, so the day before this pod comes available.
We're going to wrap it up here. I did tease Ryan Merkley primer. There's going to be more to come there, and just catching you guys up to speed on where this player stands with the Eagles organization, how that defensive group is shaping up. But we're going to have to get back to it on a different show.
Yeah.
So absolutely just keep an eye on the work that we're doing. I'm Meghan Angley. This is Jesse Montano, DNVR Avalanche at the Rink podcast.